Hey folks, I thought I'd make a video about Age of Sigmar and whether or not it can be balanced and competitive. It's a rather contentious issue in the community, and for my part, I think at its worst, it can be just as balanced and just as competitive as other GW games. And if played in the spirit of the game, it can be perhaps the most balanced and the most competitive. Um, the big um, element there, of course, is the point system. I think that's the biggest thing that really stands out. And for me, I like point systems, um, but they're not necessarily balanced, even though you might have point values. So whether or not something's good or not is in comparing the models and comparing what's the value per point, essentially, to determine whether or not a unit performs well based upon its point value. And the problem with that system is that you're always forced to take certain units if you want to play a competitive game. You might be forced to take units that you don't really want. You're forced to buy units that you don't necessarily want, or you're forced to just buy units in general in order to play the game competitively. And you, along the same lines, you're also forced to not use units that you may have wanted to use as well. And I always thought that, as much as people complain about the fact that army books and codexes increasingly get better, that was just part of the system. That if you have a point system, and the goal is to, as a company, is to put models out that you're going to buy, it almost makes sense for them to create a system where every army book and every codex does get better, so that you're forced to go out and buy them. And I think that's one of the inherent problems with the point system. If there was a truly balanced game where every unit was truly balanced with one another, given a point value, there would be very little reason to go out and buy a brand new unit. So the company is forced to continually make better units, not necessarily just on paper, but purely in points. It becomes just a matter of, this is a more effective unit for less points. And I think that's a huge problem. I think the greatest strength of Age of Sigmar is the fact that it has no points. It's very simple. And I think the fact that it just works on model count can, in fact, be more balanced. Some have been arguing that there is still an incentive for money-wise to buy like one of the standalone unit boxes that have come out in the last couple weeks, because there are a lot more weapon options in those boxes. But I disagree with that. I think if you don't have a point system, then it just comes down to you're buying that box set for the special weapons because you think they look cool, because they add a particular look to the army. They're not all the exact same weapon options throughout your entire force. You want to see kind of a wide amount of different weapons, different abilities, and that plays into the game. You want the games to be fun and characterful, not the exact same stat line, the exact same weapon options across the board. That's boring. So there's an incentive to make the game more fun by buying a box, but by having more weapon options. I don't think it's about money, though. Of course, Games Workshop wants to make money by you having more fun, and I think that's definitely an incentive. But there's no monetary incentive to perform better in the game by buying a new box set. You might have better weapon options, they might perform better, but there's nothing to prevent me from just putting down one or two more extra models on my side that would counter it. The bottom line with this is I really don't think I can blame GW for making decisions that they think will make them money and are business smart. Um, I'm not like a huge capitalist, but I totally understand that corporations are there for their people that own all the shares, and they exist for one reason, to make money. So, the price point is what it is. I don't really have much to say on that issue. I continue to buy their models. Um, I think that they do things based upon whether or not it's profitable or not. And I think that's one of the reasons why they stopped supporting the competitive play in tournament scene. I don't think that's necessarily the most profitable element of their hobby and of Games Workshop as a company. I think they're far more interested, as they've said over and over and over again, putting models out. They're a model-making company, not a rules-making company. The barrier for entry for making rules is non-existent, right? Anyone in their basement can make a fantastic rule set. It can be good and bad, but all it takes is some hard work, some creative ideas, not even your own ideas, and you can make a rule system. And really, GW and all of its competitors can do that. So when it comes to rules, there's very much a particular level where all the companies are on the exact same foot. What GW has as a strength, where it surpasses its competition, is just the fact that it's a far larger entity. It can develop far more. It has the infrastructure. It has the capacity to do far more. I mean, I could develop a fantastic rule set in my basement, but then designing and manufacturing the models and then putting them into stores, that's the incredible hard part of the business. And that's where GW's strength is. It isn't in designing rules. I think we all know that. I really think that the Age of Sigmar rule set is going to be expanded upon. And frankly, it already has been. If you bought the Age of Sigmar book, the hardcover, bigger book, it contains more rules. And those are rules that it says in there apply to all games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. There's a full extra page of special abilities for your leaders and generals. If you're Chaos or Order or Destruction, you each get an extra ability, which are incredibly powerful. If you have a Priest, you get an extra ability. If you are playing in the Brimstone in the Realm of Fire, you gain extra rules for your units that shoot, extra rules for terrain, which make it much more different. You get an extra spell for your wizard. There's, again, more rules for elements in the table, terrain, and different terrain features. And so they're going to add it. And I would point out the fluff in the book is still developed. My biggest problem with the book is that it's kind of disorganized. It's really kind of all over the place. But it's still developing. I think as the game goes on, you're going to find more details. It actually ends on a cliffhanger. So there are more books coming. And the amount of scenarios and missions in this book is really cool. And they're far more in depth than any other missions we've really had previously. So those that have played the game and don't like it, those that have played maybe a game or two and then just come out absolutely against it, that's fine. If you play the game, you absolutely don't like it, that's fine. But I think most of the time they're not playing in the spirit of the game. They're trying to play it with a different mindset, play it with how Warhammer used to be, and they're almost playing it incorrectly, right? As I said, the game's evolving. There are narrative missions and scenarios That's how the game's supposed to be played. If you just put your armies down against each other and smash into each other, you're not going to have fun. I don't expect anyone to. That's not how the game's supposed to be played. And I think it's really ironic that the people that look at the rules and see all these ways to exploit them and then say, well, the game's not competitive. Well, that's because you're thinking of just, looking for ways to destroy your opponent. That's not necessarily competitive play, right? In the same way with this element of the game is imbalanced, and I could take an entire army that, with archers and arrows or entire unit brings on units with spells and things like that. One unit of archers doesn't make the game imbalanced. One unit of crazy demons being brought on doesn't make it imbalanced. If you take your entire army designed specifically for that because you know that that's like a really crazy rule, you're not playing the game. The goal is not to just gouge your opponent's eyes out and to just exploit every rule because you can. If you have opponents that are perfectly fine with that, they're having a good time, which is the bottom line, then go for it. But if you finish a game and your opponent's pissed off, or you played a game and you think, boy, that was lame, wasn't competitive, it was easy, you're playing the game wrong. That's the bottom line. And I just find it really ironic that the people that complain the most about the fact that it seems imbalanced are the first to always point out where and point out that, I could win on turn one. Well, yeah, don't do that. I mean, that's basically what GW has even said. Yeah, you can do that. You're not going to find a lot of opponents to play you. And, that type of mindset. I know people that have geared their armies to just absolute, taking everything that's really amazing on point system. And it makes other players uncomfortable. It's actually ruined a number of gaming communities I've been in where Eldar players don't want to play against people that play other opponents that their armies are designed to confront Eldar and to defeat them. You can play competitively though, if you are open to understanding that balance and competitive are really two different things. And a point system is in some ways the most imbalanced because of that, because you can just maximize things. Without the points, it becomes far more arbitrary, which I think ends up being more balanced. And I'll just talk about that for a bit. So there are many communities solutions available for imposing balance. And if you like one of those, go for it. Terrific. I'm going to, for the next little while, just explore how the game naturally plays without something more artificial and grown by the community. I might eventually use and adopt one of those. Certainly, this game for tournaments is really impractical. That doesn't mean you can't play competitively, but for tournaments, because you need to definitely impose some sort of structure there, especially if you have, if you have whoever wins gets prizes and things like that, right? The minute that it becomes not just about, honor, then you're going to find people that are obviously gearing their army to absolutely win at any cost. So I would point out that a balanced game, even if you believe that points are inherently balanced, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a competitive game. Competitive really comes into personal skill level, right? So if you have, if you have a game that's very, very balanced, let's say a traditional game such as chess which would be like the epitome of a balanced game. That's not necessarily a competitive game if the guy sitting across from me is a world champion. He's a grandmaster in chess, and he's just going to, So we each have the same capacity in terms of what the pieces do, but his skill level is so far more above me that it's not going to be a competitive game. And the same would even be applied to, say, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, right? Where even if you adjust the armies for composition based upon like some outside composition rule set that equals the armies, so that the points are a legitimately balanced system. That doesn't necessarily mean the game's going to be competitive, right? What I like about Age of Sigmar is that you can still make it competitive without the stigma of giving someone more points. You just put down a few extra models. And I would kind of point out that two balanced armies played by opponents equal in relatively skill is by far the most true competitive play. But balanced is really a difficult kind of term to really equal. Points have never done a great job at balancing armies. In Age of Sigmar, you could definitely have where like two armies based upon a particular theme can play competitively. You could even have two armies that each maximize every exploitation and yet play competitively against one another. Obviously, two competitive armies can play competitively against one another. But also, two non-competitive armies can play competitively against each other. It really depends on player skill. That's the biggest linchpin that makes it a game competitive. And I think I'd much rather have a competitive game than a balanced game. I would actually say if you think that you know the rules, you think that you can maximize all the special abilities far better than your opponent, then if you want a competitive game, you're going to opt for a smaller force. Maybe not so much smaller that you get this sudden death, but small enough that it's still a competitive game. You can take a smaller model count or an army that doesn't focus on uber qualitative units. If you simply could take the most exploitive army, that really says nothing about skill. If you study military history whatsoever, no one really cares about a particular army or a leader that wins an equal battle, right? You look at the greatest military leaders in history. They're the people that can win against a superior force, not an equal force. So if I were to play against someone that, let's say, I play a lot of games against my wife. I love her, but she's not as, I would say, a competitive player. She's just not into it. She's not trying to find ways to just absolutely maximize her army at every given possibility. I think it's perfectly fine for her to have a larger army than me. Because, and I would see that as a challenge to try to work my way to victory and success over a larger force. And a lot of these narratives and missions and scenarios play into that. They're not designed to be equal. So I honestly think that the way the system is designed now could be perhaps the most balanced system if you play it right. A weaker player could very well have more models, and a stronger player could be at a tactical disadvantage, and that's perfectly fine. As long as both, if you can have a larger force, but as long as you're relatively balanced in or if one person is slightly better at the game, you're perfectly fine doing that. Well, here's something that I would definitely do is I would try to match your opponent. If you're both competitive people, you both think you have the same skill level, match your opponent in terms of deployment. It's almost like you can equal your opponent with every single unit you put down, right? After a few games, you're going to know how strong a certain unit is, what the advantages of that unit is over this one, and you can almost use deployment as a way to balance the game. He puts down a monster, maybe you put down a monster. He puts down a big character, maybe you put down a big character. Doesn't necessarily have to be one for one like that. If he puts down a monster, you could put down 10 or 12 elite infantry, something that you think would give you the same tactical advantage as what he's put down. I think a lot of people are going into the game thinking, I'm going to bring X army. And that's fine if you wanted to play it that way. But I would maybe encourage people to kind of not have a preset army. And maybe bring your collection. If you're playing at home, this is obviously far easier. But you can have like a collection available where you can put out a few models and you know roughly how they're going to perform. If you're off by a couple here, a couple more, or a couple less, that's not going to have a huge impact on the game. And I think you can make this game balanced and certainly competitive. If you're playing the game, you're both having fun, then it doesn't really matter. The balance comes in when one person feels like they've have not had fun because their opponents have taken too much, or just it doesn't feel right. And but I think you can make it work. So thanks for listening, and have a good one.